Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on the Content Access panel. So, one of the main reasons for this topic is just to sort of, I suppose, reintroduce to the community about how, as a network, you can sort of talk to the CDN providers and some of the things that may be part of your thought processes in planning your network. So, as a question to the panel, when ready, I'd like to introduce Ben from Limelight, Ronan from Akamai, and Tom from Barn. So Ben, if you'd like to introduce yourself first, please.
I'm Ben Nicklin. I'm Director of Network Strategy and Interconnection for Limelight Networks. Been with Limelight for about 3 years, been involved in kind of links and peering community for about 8 or 9.
I'm Ronan Mullally from Akamai. I'm on the network architecture team, and a large part of that revolves around interconnection and interacting with IXs, peers, members, and stuff like that day to day.
And I'm Tom Rigg from Barn. I'm the COO. Barn is predominantly a eyeball network, 99% residential. This is an important thing for us at the moment. We're at that stage where coming up to around about 10,000 gigabit eyeballs, all wanting access to content. We've really got to sort ourselves out.
Cool. And I'm Simon Beevers. I'm here representing the LINX Programme Committee and the moderator of the panel. So obviously capacity planning, as a question to the panel here, how do you approach it? How do you handle the normal growth? And then how do you handle the special events, the unexpected growth? Obviously there was a great presentation earlier from the BBC on those kind of moments. So Tom?
Okay, so for us at the moment, what we're doing is we're looking at all the access points that we can get to for our network. So we're looking at peering, we do that obviously. We're looking at PNI links with everybody. And right now what we're doing is we're making sure that we've got enough bandwidth everywhere, because at the moment, if you look at it, gigabit circuits, nobody's really using them. When events happen, sure, they get used a lot. So we've got to make sure they've got enough capacity everywhere. So we're leaving transit links in with burstable rates. And what we're going through at the moment is a process of figuring out, okay, how can we best plan for PNI links, peering, and what do we need to do about transit at the moment, okay?
Okay. Ronan, from a CDN perspective, what sort of thoughts go through your cycles to get ready for these sort of things?
Well, for a start, we have historic data, so we look at the trends and the direction things are going in. We engage with our customers and see what they have planned for the next 6, 12, 24 months. We work on where we see that traffic going and where that content is going to be consumed, and engage with the providers responsible for that and make sure we have enough capacity in place.
Cool. And Ben, from Limelight's perspective,
Yeah, pretty similar to Ronan. We kind of engage a lot with our customers. If we have a sports series, football matches coming on, we talked about that earlier, then yeah, we know when those spikes are likely to happen. The tricky part comes in is when you get that kind of perfect storm of large sport event and then a software update being dumped on us at the same time. They come a bit more tricky. There's a couple of considerations. Certainly egress is the biggest part. The other main one is also looking at server capacity and storage.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously historically from when I've operated certain things, sort of sitting in Tom's shoes for a second, some of the problems have been trying to write that perfect business case for that one-off spike or two spike. There's more coming throughout the year, which is a little easier, but trying to say, hey, I want to spend £50,000 on this upgrade doesn't go very well, does it? And I suppose learning a bit more from Ronan and Ben recently, obviously the opposite side of that, I suppose you can ask the customer, the person wanting the content to be provisioned, to pay a bit more for the server. I mean, this is where I need you guys to fill in the blank. Is that possible to do it that way, or is that not the model?
Not sure about from a sales perspective. I'm not actually sure how they operate. I mean, yeah, we certainly have large-scale events. I mean, we had one historical one from a couple of years ago when Amazon first did the EPL. So that required a large-scale build-out from 2 or 3 different CDNs, along with our peers. So we obviously handed back to the sales team, well, yeah, we can deliver this, but it's going to cost us this.
Yeah.
And obviously then I would assume, obviously I'm not involved in that anymore, that is then built in as a cost back to the customer.
Cool, okay. Overall, do you guys feel you have the tools and processes to influence the traffic, Tom, from your perspective, from what you know at the minute?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we really try our best. You know, we've got flows coming in, and we monitor them, look at the IPFix data, and figure out where things are coming in. We really try and get symmetric traffic going as much as possible, and we really try and use all the tools at our disposal to try and engineer where the traffic's going to come in from. But we're, you know, in the grand scheme of things, we're really quite small. So what we need to be doing is relying on what the others are doing and gaining access to the relative tools that are available. I'd like more. I always want more. Okay, I'm always, you know, want to be proactive, want to be ahead of the game, preparing for what's coming, so that none of my links are then saturated at all. So yeah, for us, I mean, we've got a good suite of access to tools, but could there be more?
This is where I'll over to you, Ronan. Obviously, you touched on, you guys strictly monitor everything that's going on. You engage with the relevant networks, etc. Do you feel that what's happening at the minute, is there any more that can be done, or are we at a good place?
I think there are layers. I mean, if you look at this from the CDM perspective, there are however many hundred LINX members. Some of those might consume a few hundred megabits, some of them might consume, you know, many, many gigabits. And it's hard to come up with a solution that will satisfy everything. And at some point, you have to start kind of generalizing and saying, you know, we'll handle this particular cohort this way and this cohort that way. In general, what Akamai in particular, and I expect most CDNs in general, will try and do is to prioritize the content to the capacity available. Try to serve content from as close to the destination as possible, and then gradually work backwards from there until eventually you're resorting to serving over transit. And it's really about making sure that there are sufficient options in that kind of chain to consume or to carry what you need to carry before you run out of options before transit.
Yeah, and Ben, from Limelight's perspective, is Limelight engaging with the community, or?
Yeah, very much so. So we've been fortunate enough that some of our customers are actually really good with giving us a breakdown of almost down to an ASN. So how much traffic they're going to send through that event to that ASN. Typically, that's kind of the top 5 or 6, and then it starts going downwards. Certainly, likewise with Ronan, we monitor everything that goes on within the network. We monitor how much traffic we have. If we are seeing that, you know, once we have that predicted traffic level come through from our customer, and we look at how much capacity we have to that peer, and it's like, no, that's not enough, we're going to saturate. We then engage customers, we engage with the peer and say, where can we turn up more capacity? Where can it go? If we run out of capacity to you, because either you are port saturated or we're port saturated, where can we offload it to? Which is the preferred transit provider if we have to go down that route?
Yeah, so it gets me on to the next question about the overflow, but I think we've kind of really covered that, like you say, once you've dealt with public peering and or private peering, depending on the preference, then you've got either physical servers depending on the CDN provider, and then you're into transit, and then after that you're dropping packets on the floor, really, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, okay. Sort of thing, what opportunities are there for things to work better together? I mean, some things that I experienced was documentation, you know, and having these conversations. Now, it's great, obviously, having this meeting and being able to come and talk to your good selves and anybody else from any other CDN. But is there anything out there, at least from the public-facing side of stuff, that you wish you could understand more, Tom? Is there like a repository you could go to? I mean, these are questions because I'm out of the game now.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're going through at the moment, and you know, if there's any sort of standardization that could be done, that and again made public, so all the operators can work to the similar standard, which I would hope would then help with, you know, planning what you're doing with your network, how you're interconnecting, and what to expect. I mean, for me at the moment, you know, obviously we know which events are coming up, and you know, yeah, could there be more? Could there be more out there? I don't know.
Cool. And then obviously from your perspective, Ben, do you feel that the documentation on Limelight, either as public or at least like a member page kind of paywall, not a paywall, sorry, a login wall, is that documentation where you would like it to be from your perspective?
Probably not. I know there's something that I've looked at internally is kind of having whether I want to call it like a message board or something that allows peers to go in and actually see, for instance, what large events we have coming up. So it actually becomes visible to them. That is more problematic because, again, some of it's confidential data, so we can't always allow access to that. In terms of who you talk to for peering, again, we use PeeringDB. The addresses are on there. We don't automate our peering. It comes through to human beings. So if you send an email to the peering at Limelight, it actually hits me and the rest of my team, and then it gets reviewed.
And Ronan, from what you can see from Akamai's perspective, is that in a good place for you as well?
There's always room for improvement. Depending on how a particular ISP interacts with us, they may already have access to information, kind of depending on how we're deployed with them. There's room to make that a little more generalized, but I don't think we'll get to the point that we'll have a common kind of interface across CDNs, because CDNs work in different ways.
Yeah.
Akamai is heavily, kind of underpinned by DNS. Other CDNs will be more kind of traditional network topology aware and stuff like that. So it's going to vary from CDN to CDN.
Yeah. And obviously a lot of the way that the traffic is delivered, and obviously we don't want to get into the mechanisms because that's not the topic here, but would having some form of probe-based solution, so you say to ISP similar to the RIPE Atlas idea, just picking that as one option and saying, here, put these around the network and then we'll work with you better, or things like that, would that work? To you, Ronan?
Strikes me something you could try and game quite easily, depending on where you put your probes. What we do is we measure in-band performance from Akamai deployments towards end user, destination addresses, and we'll feed those results back in fairly close to real time, and we'll make decisions based on what we observe. So what we are monitoring really is the actual path towards the end user. It's far from perfect. Like I said, again, it's very driven by an ISP's DNS infrastructure. Yeah. But I don't know that sending out widgets to plug into your network in key places really is the ideal way to do it.
Yeah. Well, maybe to Tom then at this point, maybe turning away from probes into telemetry, having some way of streaming your telemetry to the CDNs, maybe, would that be an option, or is that breaking a few rules?
I think fair comment that CDNs work in different ways. Absolutely fine. But as long as you understand how they make the decisions, then do you really need much more monitoring other than that? If you understand how the decisions are being made from the consumer to the content, surely you can then look at those segments of network and apply that appropriately there, rather than having probes and everything else, because what are they going to do? Are they going to cause more problems than they're worth if they're reporting wrong information, or they're not configured correctly, or whatever else, and you end up with traffic going another way, and it's just another thing that you've got to try and deal with. There's a reasonable amount of tools out there, aren't there, really? Yeah. If you understand how both sides are operating, then you'll be able to get there. And I like, you go to a human at peering at. That's good, because you can talk about, what's best for the link between you as the content provider and the operator. What's best for them? Because it could all be different, couldn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's very much so. I mean, again, we come to these kind of events exactly to have these kind of conversations. And you and I talking outside earlier. Yeah. Where can we peer with you? What kind of content that we get picking up? So it's exactly engage with the community, engage with people. Strangely enough, actually, as a community that we deal with communications, we sometimes don't communicate that well.
Yeah.
Well, not face to face anyway.
So some of the other ideas, obviously, when you get into obviously being on the public peering lands like LINX, which is great, but you get to that point where you're transitioning into some form of direct interconnect. Maybe as a wider thought, trying to get those cross connects sometimes can be difficult within a data center. We've got LINX. Maybe the idea of, say, a fractal port of some description, because there is the private peering LAN that I know Mike's stood up several meetings ago and went through in great detail. Tom, would that be something you would easily take up, or would you just prefer a pair of fibers?
I think at the moment, I would much prefer a pair of fibers, but that's because you're creating a relationship with the other side, and you can really control what's going on with that link. And yes, there's it'd be good if there were other offerings that you could maybe replace that piece of fibre with another way of interconnecting it. I know there are a lot of products out there, and LINX are doing great things in that space too, but there's just something about having that fibre in place. That's just my opinion. And that relationship you have with whoever it is you're connecting to, you can have great control over that link, ultimate control over that link.
Yeah, and to Ben, would that give you too much of a headache from the planning, etc., that you've got to go through by comboing a port rather than dedicating?
Yeah, I think so. Again, we have LINX peering, and that's the one which we use as aggregation for multiple ASNs. When we go down the PNI route, we're expecting to see a single ASN on the other end of that. And I think if you start to aggregate them or to 2, 3 over a single port, it would become problematic.
And Ronan, probably similar.
The same. Just the kind of, I suppose, the phase change from here's an IX port that we can see scores or hundreds of members over and we can treat as a population, to here's another port that is 100 gigs and you can push that to this particular destination. If you start trying to introduce layers in between, it makes the understanding and the monitoring and the traffic feedback and performance stuff a lot more complicated.
No, that's again, we don't want to introduce any more complexity because there's plenty of stuff going on there. So obviously there's been a couple of things in the past about how CDNs in particular can leverage such technologies as multicast. Now that obviously brings some overheads. Now there's a particular one that I'm referring to is a podcast that came out a while ago. So from Limelight's perspective, any thoughts on just introducing multicast into a service provider's network and hoping for the best?
I'll be honest, I'd probably go to one of my other colleagues on that one. Yeah. I think it's a bit beyond, that one goes beyond my background and my understanding.
Fair enough. Ronan?
I think there's potential there. I'm not just saying that because the podcast was an Akamai podcaster, but if you look at, a busy Tuesday, for example, people today need to scale their networks for days like that, where the traffic flow could be tenfold or more above what's normal. Be it a software download, be it a streaming event. Like I said earlier, it's hard to make the case for a 50,000 upgrade. But when these things are happening, 10, 20 times a year, you probably stand to lose more if you can't deliver the experience your users are after. Multicast potentially is a way of taking some of the multiplier out of those kind of spikes. I haven't looked at multicast in quite a long time, but if deployed in the right place, not necessarily global multicast streams, but I think potentially yes, there's a way there to handle the particularly kind of bit heavy workloads that don't necessarily correspond to a processing heavy workload. That could have legs in the future, yeah.
Cool. And then Tom, from your perspective as an operator, welcoming that into the network and then having to support it, etc., is that an overhead that you wish?
Well, anything that we can do to try and work together and make sure that we're spending the money in the right way and putting the right links in, we'd have to do anything that you try and bring in or deploy. Is it for the greater good? Is it going to make a real difference to how we run our network and the end users who are consuming it? If the answer is yes to all those things, then we ought to think about it. But if it's not going to create a huge impact, should we be doing it? Yeah.
Cool. And then the last question, which may not get a full answer, I appreciate that it is, but it's on the list. So, at least from the CDN's perspective, what sort of processes can you tell us about that you will go through for thinking about the best way to serve the traffic to the end location? And Ronan, you talked about DNS, things like that.
How do you define best?
Yes, it is in quotation marks, so it is for interpretation.
Best could be best for the CDN, best could be best for the end user, best could be best for the ISP. There's a whole host of compromises here. Akamai, like I said, is very much underpinned by DNS, and when you go to connect to an Akamai served website, there'll be a bit of DNS magic in the background during which we'll decide, okay, this is the best place to send the end user connection to. That can be based on things like particular latency requirements or an expectation that this is a high volume download. It may not be latency sensitive. It can be best based on cost, best based on whether or not we can serve a particular type of content in a particular location. There's a whole host of considerations that go into
Yeah,
that.
I was going to say it's quite a long
Yeah.
question to answer really on such a short thing. Ben, it's very similar from Limelight's perspective?
It's a very similar thing. I mean, as I said, best is a bit of a can of worms. You know, it can ultimately give you many different scenarios. But again, we look at where does the announcements land on our network, where is it best served, not just from an egress point of view, but also from a server capacity point of view, which is the other main consideration from a CDN point of view, is, you know, I might have loads and loads of egress capacity in that site, but if I'm delivering, you know, compute heavy applications out of that site, the computing power might run out before my egress power. So you have to make sure you're looking at that point of view. And likewise, when we have the kind of the perfect storm of large sports event video on demand, versus, as well as at the same time as being you know, a large software download. Well, obviously, from a best point of view, well, we're going to serve the video on demand as close to the content or close to the eyeball as we can. What we're going to do then is take away the software which isn't latency critical and take that away from the problem. So for us, you know, when we've had issues like this, we serve all the video on demand as locally as we can, and we might push the software out to a neighbouring country. So if we're doing, you know, live sports in the UK, then fine, we'll push the software out to Paris or to Amsterdam, where actually the computing power isn't being strained, and we can drop it on transit because it's not latency critical.
Yeah. And then Tom, from an operator's perspective, is it still the case that, say, PNIs are still cheaper than public peering than transit? How do you see it commercially from that perspective?
Yeah, well, I think interesting comments about what's best. I mean, from our point of view, really, it's what the consumer gets, right? Because we're building network for, and for our point of view, the best possible internet experience that the consumer can get, because that, you know, they'll back having you as a provider. So it's best for the consumer. You know, we're in the position. We just need to work on what's best in terms of linking in. I mean, yeah, sure, okay, transit costs a lot, but I don't mind if you want to serve, you know, download gaming downloads or whatever that isn't latency dependent through our transit links. I don't mind paying a little bit extra for that to come in if it's best served that way, and actually the video content is going to be absolutely immaculate to the end user. You know, we're in the realms that, yeah, we do have great peering links. I mean, I think about 85–90% of our traffic is coming in on PNIs and peering, and the other is coming in through transit. And you can see it bursting every now and again with odd bits coming through. Yeah. But I know we're not a huge supplier with millions of customers, but I would be quite happy to say, all right, well, we'll leave these transit links in for these sorts of things, because for me, what matters is best. You know, the consumer has the best possible experience, from my point of view.
No, that's still good to see from you're not driven by the commercial, you're driven by the customer experience, which is fantastic. Yeah. So all in all, that's the main questions we had framed ready for this panel. So I'll throw it open to the floor if anybody's got any questions. Looks like we've done a brilliant job of covering all the topics. Oh, we've got one here.
Can't let you get away without asking a question. Rich Cooper from BBC. You've not talked about embedding at all. You've just talked about peering interconnect. So what's your views on embedding and how deeply you should embed into the networks?
I think that's one for Akamai, probably.
You do more embedding than we do.
Yes. So our ideal, again, it depends on the type of workload, on the type of content. But where we have a cache deployed inside a network, that would tend to be our favorite place to start. That's kind of constrained by practicalities like how many servers do you have in a rack in that ISP? Is this type of content suitable for that? Is the content present in that already? But yes, for workloads like things like software downloads, things like live streaming events, an embedded cache is a good place to generate, to start from in terms of what you deliver this.
Can I ask the same question for Barn?
Yeah, so we do have some caches in the network with various providers. I think from our and again it goes back to the commercials of providing rack space, power, location. Is it actually going to be nearest to your eyeballs, closer than the peering point? For us, yes, because we are very rural. So in the rural northwest, nearest is Manchester, and we're also in Edinburgh. But yeah, actually where the eyeballs sit is in the Lake District. So how close can you get it? If a cache can be closer in part of our core network and it's serving, I don't know, you're preloading an update for a game or whatever, and it can be served right from there and doesn't even get to the exchange points, that's great. I'll pay for some power, I'll pay for some rack space, let's get them in.
At their best, an embedded cache basically generates traffic inside your network. You have a small cache fill, you get an n-fold result out the other side. Yeah. And it's a great way of getting, bypassing bottlenecks and stuff on backhaul and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can only add just to the side, I've seen several improvements, certainly in the Akamai side of stuff, making the server and compute a lot better commercially in its lack of power usage and its increase in connectivity and bandwidth. So it's great to see that evolution. Is there any more questions from the floor?
Simon Lockhart from Bogons. If you look at LINX has obviously got regional peering strategy, how much do you see that interconnecting in the regions benefits content to eyeballs, particularly CDNs and things like that? Because the counter argument is if you compare the UK to somewhere like the US, it's actually really small. And serving it all from London probably doesn't make a huge benefit for the content providers if you take backhaul capacity out of the equation.
One for you, Ben.
So yeah, we've looked at the remote peering or the regional peering a number of times. Most recently, we were looking into Scotland. But even when we've looked at, okay, do we build a cache up in Edinburgh? Do we actually serve traffic from there? But a lot of the announcements were still landing in Manchester. So what we would end up with as we build backbones typically connecting our caches for cache fill and management would be essentially U-turning from Scotland down to Manchester, collect the content and go back without the cache in Scotland even being used, which then defeats the object.
So would it be prevalent to sort of move, going back to the documentation conversation, about maybe using something like MED or something that's transitive to announce this prefix is this location and kind of having that agreement between the operator and the CDN? Would that help?
Possibly, yeah.
Obviously, if the actual announcement is only in Manchester and never in Edinburgh, the traffic's going that way. But I know I've had conversations with other CDNs in the past about announcing unique prefixes. So, granted, breaking the prefix down and only announcing Edinburgh from Edinburgh, so on and so forth. But things like that would definitely help.
I think so. I mean, to Simon's point, when you're looking at putting in the regional ones, and yes, the US is by magnitude a lot bigger, but you're looking at where are the internet gateways? Where are the providers actually situated? And at the moment, probably, 70, 80% of those land either in Manchester or London.
Yeah. Ronan, would that be something from Akamai's perspective? Would that work?
I think it will depend on the network and the regional IX. I mean, we've been present at Scotland, for example, for several years. And it's kind of a chicken and egg. How much do we deploy in terms of physical infrastructure to support the content that we're delivering when there's a limited population there? So you're not going to go in with a 10 rack deployment and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of infrastructure. You go in much smaller than that, and that limits what you can do. The other consideration we frequently see is DNS. The kind of the magnet that attracts Akamai traffic is your DNS resolution. Yeah. And in the UK, all roads tend to lead to London. A lot of networks will put their DNS infrastructure in London. We will see DNS queries coming from London. Yeah. And we kind of make the coupling that the resolver and the customer are reasonably proximate. Now, there are cases where the DNS resolver is in London, but the end user could be in Lerwick.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work out.
Yeah, you can't always plan for those. Tom, would you welcome that kind of operational overhead, obviously in collaboration? Is that something that works for you?
Yeah, well, I think for us, I mean, we're quite lucky that we're quite close to Manchester, and that's got a lot going for it. And also thinking about going across into Newcastle, that's got a lot going for it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for us, we make a conservative effort with our DNS to make sure that they're located in the right place, really near to where the people are asking. So we do get content, I would like to think, as shortest path as possible. But, you know, you can only control so much with you know, enforcing DNS onto the routers, everything. What if people are choosing whatever they like? It's out of our control. But yeah, no, I mean, anything would help bring content closer to the eyeballs is great.
Super, thank you for the question. Anybody else from the floor?
Any more for any more? Okay.
Super, thank you very much. So I'd like to have a round of applause, please, for the panelists, Ben, Ronan and Tom. Thank you.